Hello, it's Amelia Lee here from Undercover Architect. When you're building or renovating, you may want to be considering how you design an energy efficient home. With energy costs rising, the way that our home uses energy for heating and cooling and for running the home on a daily basis can continue to have a significant impact on our financial stability and also on the comfort of our home overall. In this interview, I talked to Tori Walker of BERA. Tori is a principal energy rater and has experience right throughout Australia, but the tips that she shares are applicable anywhere. This is about understanding your climate for where your home is designed and how you can create a home that's going to be comfortable year round and design that in as much as possible in the way that you actually approach the design of the home and its suitability to your climate, your material choices, how you insulate it, how you glaze it, what types of things you use in the home, so that you can actually save as much money as possible in the heating and cooling costs of the home long term. Tori talks about energy rating systems and about the kinds of things that they look at when they're being used to assess the energy efficiency of a home. And in Australia, this is something that happens at your building approval stage. So whether you're building or renovating, if you need a building approval, you will need to get an energy efficiency assessment done because it's part of achieving your approval, and you'll have to achieve a 6-star rating at the time of recording this video. Tori shares loads of fantastic information in this interview. I hope you enjoy it. So, Tori, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here because you've got a wealth of experience and expertise that's really going to help the UA community in this regard. So I'm wondering if you can start with just, in your words, telling me what you think an energy efficient home actually is.
Yes, I love this question. An energy efficient home is one that uses good design, appropriate construction, and the environment to create an energy efficient home that really doesn't use much energy in heating or cooling the home. It uses the environment, the design, and the construction. So the light bulbs and appliances, they're important, but really it's the whole home and the construction of the home.
Yeah, it's fantastic because I think that a lot of people underestimate just what they can do with the things that they're already doing anyway, you know, the design and the material selections and those types of things to make such a significant difference in how the home will perform over the long term and what it will mean in terms of their heating and cooling costs over the long term as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I always tell people when they start here, this is the thing that will really make a big difference to the sustainability of the home long term too. So. Now, part of this is obviously going to be understanding the climate of where you live because climates vary and then their demands that places on the home and how it needs to perform. So why is it important to know the climate and, you know, where do you sort of suggest people start when they're thinking about the climate for the home and the location of the home?
Yeah, climate is really important. I think a lot of people intuitively know their climate. You know, we get those cold winds in September or we get our heat waves in December or they might come in February. So they kind of intuitively know. But if you've got accurate climate data, then you can really use that to inform how you design your house, depending on where the sun is at particular times of year and where you want to be heating or cooling, you know, working with the climate. So I live in southeast Queensland and our temperature is pretty mild. Our climate's pretty mild, but we've got those heat waves. They come in December and January. So you need to be able to have a design and construction that can cope with that. But say in central Australia, most people would intuitively think it's really hot, but actually their nights get really cold. And so they have to have a design that can also to some degree try and bring in that winter heat, trap it so that for those really cold nights, they don't have to be putting the heating on. So if you can understand your climate zone in more detail and appreciate that that's going to have an impact on the design, then, yeah, you're further ahead in your understanding of it all.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I often speak to homeowners and they'll say to me, oh, you know, we live in a warm location. It's warm for a good part of the year. So I don't need to worry so much about orienting my home correctly because I actually want to keep the sun out of my home. And it's like, well, you may want to keep the warmth of the sun out, but you probably still want to let sunlight in. So let's have a think about,
Exactly.
you know, how can you design for that sensitivity, that climate. And it is that thing too I see in, you know, a lot of my career's been in southeast Queensland, and there's always this dogmatic approach sometimes to designing homes that will stay cool, But then in winter, you still get fairly cold nights in winter. And if your house hasn't been set up to deal with that, then you will be running some kind of form of heating for most of the winter, which can get very expensive. So,
Oh, absolutely. And especially with our open plan homes at the moment, heating a house, yeah, it actually does cost quite a bit. And the winter is longer than we all like to admit. And I think for some people too, the summer is longer than they like to admit because most people want to enjoy where they are. And so will sometimes in their mind make out that it's not as bad as it is. But also in terms of those heating and cooling costs, it's about future proofing your home because no matter what happens with the National Energy Guarantee
yeah,
and politics, you know,
prices
our
are only
heating and
going
cooling
up, aren't they?
yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think too when you look at the demand, I we live in a what's known as I suppose a regional location. It's northern New South Wales, but I've never experienced as many electricity power outages as we have here. We just lose power. It just sort of trips and the whole area will lose power for a few hours. And it's just because the infrastructure isn't here to cope with demands at particular times of the year in the same way that it might be in an urban location. And you're starting to see that happen more in urban locations as well. And the fact that
Or in whole states.
yeah,
like Australia.
that's very true. Grid's just not coping with the demands that our increasing electrical needs are placing on them and just not keeping pace with the growth that our electrical demands are having. So I think that, that future-proofing idea is a very sound one because if we can look to what we can do to minimise our home's energy use, then that's only going to stand us in good stead as those prices keep rising over the long term. So, and for me, this is all about saving cash. It's not, like it has that beautiful benefit of being, friendly to the environment, creating a much more comfortable and home that feels better, but it also affects our bottom line and our financial stability in the home too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In the long term.
Yes,
Sometimes
definitely.
you need to have that 10-year focus to recoup some of the costs, but I mean, who wouldn't think of that 10-year focus?
Most
It's a
definitely.
home. Most people are planning on living in it for longer than 1 year.
Yes. Yeah, and I see a lot of these things having benefits in resale now too, because people are keen to they do look for these as advantages and differentiation points in the marketplace. So it is something that definitely, 10 years ago you couldn't really get any extra premium for energy efficient measures. Now it is something that is actually a saleable asset in a home. So now, the National Construction Code, which sort of governs all of the building legislation in Australia, it actually requires homes to achieve a 6-star energy rating, doesn't it? And I've seen in my career that climb from sort of 3-star, 4-star, 5-star up to 6-star. So it's moving and keeps moving. Can you actually explain to the UA community what does a 6-star rating mean in a practical sense? Like what is the star rating system and what does it mean in terms of a home and in a way that I suppose has a common sense application?
Yeah, sure. So the way I explain it to people who have never heard of it before is that the 6-star rating on houses is similar to the energy rating you might have on a fridge. You see those little stars on that little sticker that we're all now familiar with. So it's like that, but it's actually rating the house, the whole house, out of 10 stars. And it does that by working out how much energy that home is going to use in heating and cooling because they're the biggest user of energy that a house will ever have unless they've got 18 fridges or something strange. But normally it's heating and cooling that does create the majority of your energy load. So it just focuses on that, the heating and cooling, and it works out how many megajoules per metre square per year your house, or to be honest, it's an area adjusted equivalent because you can't really compare a 2-bedroom shack and a 7-bedroom mansion. So they area adjust it and then they work out what would your home use in energy and then basically equate that to a star rating. So if it uses no energy at all, it would get 10 stars. If it uses heaps and heaps of energy, it's going to get 3 or 4 stars. And so you'll need to change the construction or maybe even the design to get that megajoules down so that your stars can go up. And as you mentioned, it has been introduced incrementally. It actually is good legislation. Like it's legislation, it's not perfect, but it's good legislation. It's trying to reduce Australia's greenhouse gas emissions by having energy efficient homes built. So it's actually good legislation on the whole. It has been introduced incrementally and at the moment we're sitting at 6 stars. There's a few variations because each state has to basically adopt the National Construction Code with their own legislation. But at the moment, 6 stars is the norm.
Yeah, and it has been interesting to see it increase over that, like over the duration of my career, and see how much the actual design of the home can impact your ability to achieve that star rating. It's not just all about applying these measures after the fact of the design. You're actually obviously far better placed to bring it into the design first. And so you use a tool called NatHERS to assess this energy rating. Can you tell me what NatHERS means and what that process involves? Because when somebody's getting their building approval before they commence construction on their renovation or building project, they have to get an energy efficiency assessment done, don't they? And they have to achieve this 6-star rating. This all has to happen as part of you getting a building approval. So can you talk to me, as your role as a consultant, what you sort of do in that process, the tool, and what it looks at and how it works?
Yeah, because that's often the first time that people have heard of energy efficiency or start to think about it. So basically, NatHERS stands for the National House Energy Rating Scheme, and it is part of the National Construction Code legislation. NatHERS basically accredits the software, and there's 3 software interfaces that we can use in Australia. But behind those interfaces is an engine that's been developed by the CSIRO, and it is so comprehensive, this legislation. Basically, what it has us do is model the house into the software. So everything. We model every wall, the height of the wall, the shading of the wall, the construction of the wall, the openings in the wall, be they doors or windows or ventilation openings. And that's just for the wall. Floors, internal walls, whether it's next to a garage or next to a bathroom. So basically, you model everything into this software, and then it calculates the temperature at every room in the house, every hour of the day, every day of the year, for that particular orientation and climate zone. So you can see it's quite comprehensive, takes quite a while to run it, takes quite a lot of time to input all the information. But once you've done that, it comes out with that energy load and star rating. And the great thing about this software is once you've got all the information in, changing one element, so for example, changing the roof colour from dark to light, is really simple. You can run all the calcs again and you can find out what difference that makes to your design. So yeah, that's basically NatHERS in a nutshell. It incorporates everything to do with the house, almost everything.
Yeah, do you find, because often people, as you say, don't realise that this has to occur until they're going to find their building approval, and perhaps they might not have worked with a designer that is really passionate about sustainable design or thinks about sort of climate and site and orientation and those types of things as they're designing. I have a lot of homeowners who, inside my online courses and things like that, who are battling designers who aren't on the same page about sustainability. And so they obviously get to this point and all of the things that they've been fighting for and sort of getting pushback from their design. I had one homeowner tell me recently that she's got a south to rear house, and there has been really battling the designer to try and get northern light into her south-facing living spaces. And she actually asked this designer, what are we going to do in winter? And he said, put a heater on. And so, it's that kind of thing where you just, that poor homeowners are dealing with this in the industry because the industry isn't across the board on the same page about what it's required. Is this something you ever work with homeowners sort of at an interim basis, or do you find that homeowners are generally coming to you as the building approval is getting done? Because I can imagine this, having this, we used to have this service in-house in Mirvac, so we could test houses as we went. If there was anything that we thought was going to be a little bit odd, we could test it before we'd finalise the design and get it done. How have you found that working with homeowners, in this way can change and flex for them?
Yeah, it's a big question because it really depends on so many factors, but ordinarily, we are given the plans, the finished plans, either by the architect or the designer or the homeowner or the certifier. So my clients are all big range, and normally they're a finished set of designs. And that's okay because I see that as my job to get the design, run the calcs, and then whatever it comes out as, 4 stars, 7 stars, if it's below 6 stars, it's my job to let the client know, look, how can you achieve the 6 stars, often in the most cost-efficient manner possible, and I totally understand that. But if then with sort of increasing the insulation or changing colours, like things that don't really cost much, if we can't get it to 6 stars, then we have to start talking about treating the windows, which is often a really big part of modern home. And, not nicer designed homes often have bigger areas of glazing. So we talk to them about that and the pros and cons of using low air glass or double glazing or thermally broken frames. So I guess that's one factor. We're given the plans and it's our job to tell the client, how can you get it to reach 6 stars? And normally, for most homes, you can get it there. For then maybe 10%, 5% of homes, it requires quite a lot of work, and we have to sort of liaise back and forth and work out what's going to be the best way, what are they happy with, where do they want to spend money. I've only ever met what I would call an unrateable house that there was nothing we could do, save changing the design or making the windows a little bit smaller. I've only met 2 or 3 of those, and still we found a solution. But basically that's our job. So I don't mind if we come in at the end, but if we come in earlier and we do, like I've got some designers who are doing some eco villages on the Sunshine Coast hinterland, Gold Coast hinterland, or clients who have done a little bit of research, heard the concepts, and they get in touch and say, right, what do you think about if we're doing this? If I can get involved earlier, yeah, absolutely. Then it's far more collaborative. There are no nasty surprises. Yeah, it's a much better outcome, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think if I think my advice to a homeowner who's struggling with getting a designer to really be on board with this, yet it's something that they're really passionate about, is that they either have to find an alternate designer or they have to gather additional consultants to help them argue their case. And getting an energy assessment done is not actually a very expensive exercise in the grand scheme of things, given how much it can potentially save your home's running costs over the long term. So I think if you are feeling that you're hitting a wall, that to get an energy efficiency assessment done at that point can be a really helpful tool to then say, okay, we are definitely going down a very wrong track here. Because I always say, whilst everything's lines on a page, that's when it's the least expensive to change. So
absolutely. And I think, I was just going to say, yeah, the cost is in modelling the house. You're going to have to pay it anyway as a homeowner. So pay it earlier, and then to tweak it, it's really not much more.
Yeah.
Literally it's a couple of $100 more once you've got your final design, maybe even less than that, just to tweak it and finalise it. Yeah, it's really not much more to engage us earlier.
Yeah, that's great advice. I just wanted to touch on something that you said earlier about the dark colours and the light colours. I get this question a lot from homeowners about, and I'm actually really surprised in Australia how many people put dark roofs on their houses. I know that specific materials will talk about the technology that they've used in their dark colours to help reflect light and heat in a way that the colour choice doesn't really impact. It doesn't have impact overall on the home's ability to reflect and repel heat. But I also know that when you look at the back of those materials, they'll have product information and they'll have a rating of where that colour needs to be put into the NatHERS tool, and it'll say dark, so that of course at some point it's going to have an impact on the calculations. What feedback do you give people about, light, medium, dark colours and for their roofs and their walls of their home, and the role that it plays, I suppose, in how the calculations roll out?
The really interesting thing is that obviously roof is major. It's one of your biggest external elements to your build, and yeah, the colour does make a really big impact. Although interestingly, if you've got a really large amount of insulation in your roof, dark or light doesn't make a dramatic difference, obviously, because any impact is not actually reaching into your house. The really interesting one that people don't think about is actually your window frame colour, because you've got that massive area on your roof, you've got your walls, they do affect things to some extent, but if you think about your metal window frames, your aluminium window frames, especially with slightly larger, wider frames, which often do look better on a modern house, they are just aluminium, and the heat just goes straight through. They have a R value of 0, and so effectively your wall is just taking that heat or letting that heat out. Just people, I never thought about it before I got into this industry, and people just don't realise the impact. So changing the window frames from dark to light can also have a really big impact as
Wow,
well.
that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
I generally don't specify dark window frames on any of the houses I design. So it's,
Yeah.
I've obviously never hit that problem personally in my
Yeah.
choices. So
But I mean, sometimes you actually want them in cooler
yes,
climates. You actually want those darker window frames because you want to be able to draw in that heat in winter.
yeah, that's an interesting way to sort of
But
balance the
I
tactic.
think I actually got sidetracked from your question. Basically, I go with what people want. So if they've specified they want that colour, I go with that colour and I tell them what else you need in terms of your bulk insulation to make it work. If it's not working, yeah, then we'll talk about, look, we're reaching 4.8 or 5.8 stars. If you could just change the colour, that will get it over to the line. And I've recently done 27 units on the Gold Coast, and it was just a struggle to get a couple of them over the line with the dark roof that they'd specified. So they ended up going light roof rather than low E glazing, because that was the trade-off. That's where we got down to. You can get it to 6 stars, but you need low E glazing on your big sliding doors.
Yes.
They knew that that would cost a lot more than changing the colour of the roof.
Yeah, no cost in
Yeah,
changing the roof color, but yeah, big a premium
exactly.
in changing the glass. And
Yeah,
that's the thing, is that having this information, it does have it gives you the ability to then balance that budget and make those decisions based on what your priorities are aesthetically. So it's great. I just find that these rating tools are such a great system for feedback on the design.
yeah,
So now there are some other assessment tools that people may see. There's Basics, there's BESS. A lot of different states have different different names of systems. And I know too, we've got a lot of listeners around the world, and they will have their own. There's LEEDs, and there's a whole heap of other assessment systems. I mean, I find that they're all kind of calculating similar things. What is the difference between the systems, and how do people, to avoid confusion, what do people need to know about those different names?
yeah. If you're in New South Wales, or if you're in anywhere in Australia, you've often heard of Basics, and Basics is the New South Wales way of measuring energy efficiency. Although it's more comprehensive, they also have a water component, how much water the site is going to use, and also an energy component, which takes into account appliances and whether you're going to use solar panels and whatnot. But for their thermal comfort section, which is the equivalent of the NatHERS section, they don't just have a star rating where you've got to get a total sort of minimum or maximum energy load. They actually have heating and cooling loads. And so it's actually more difficult because you have to have a maximum heating load and a maximum cooling load. So you can't just throw a whole lot of fans and ventilation and make this home super cool in summer, not so great in winter, but fantastic in summer. You've actually got to perform well in winter and summer.
So
So that's Basics.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was going to say. So what do you tell people? They've got to achieve a 6-star rating. Do they just choose the NatHERS tool and work on that? Or if they do want to be more informed, they choose something more complicated, like that gives them, I suppose, a more complex readout like Basics. Like how do you tell people which tool to use and what you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in New South Wales, you have to use Basics, and Basics has 2 options. You've got the do-it-yourself method, which is basically looking at each element of the house and giving it a pass or fail. So the walls, the roof, the window, the floor construction, and that's really designed for simple houses. In fact, you actually can't use it if you have more than 80% of your floor area in glazing, which quite a lot of homes now do have. There's certain, you can't have a lot of mezzanine levels and numbers of windows. So it's sort of for your simpler houses, the do-it-yourself method, and that will tell you how much insulation you need in your roof once you've put in your roof construction and so on. But otherwise, it's the NatHERS simulation method, and you have to have that minimum heating and cooling load. If you lived in a different state, but you still you thought that sounded really good, actually the NatHERS certificate does print out a heating and a cooling load, so we can inform clients about that, but the result will be the 6-star.
Okay. So I think that's a really critical and useful conversation to have with your designer quite early on, isn't it? It's like, what assessment tool do we have to use? What do you think is going to give us good feedback about the energy use in this home? It is a priority to us that we really have a low energy use and that this home stays as thermally comfortable as possible without us having to provide a whole heap of artificial heating and cooling. we want to understand this at the outset, it not be this afterthought that we have to do at our approval stage, so that you're getting that being part of the conversation like you would your budget and your brief and all of those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned that there are other terms that people might have heard. I think BESS is one, especially if you're in Victoria, you will have heard that. That's used by councils as a ecologically sustainable design tool. So again, it's more comprehensive. It's a checklist that you go through. So that's one, or Green Star or Neighbours, they're for commercial builds. You might have heard of them. The other method that we can use, which is certainly a simpler method, but for some houses, it will get a pass where your NatHERS is going to be really, really difficult. And that's the deemed to satisfy elemental provisions method. So it's one of the, I know, technically NatHERS is deemed to satisfy star rating method, but we don't say all of that. So yeah, it's the deemed to satisfy method. It's similar to BASIC's do-it-yourself method. Basically, we look at each part of the construction of the build and give it a pass or fail. So you've got a low set, however many bedroom house with a metal deck roof. We say you've got to have this level of insulation under your roof and above your ceiling, and then that will be a pass. The thing that's quite often tricky with the deemed to satisfy is the glazing. Glazing, it always comes down to glazing, I have to say. So, yeah, in Queensland, there's an allowance if you've got a fan on your outdoor living area and the outdoor living area qualifies, or if you've got PV panels on your roof, then you can use deemed to satisfy using the National Construction Code 2009 values. So it's easier to get Queensland homes passed with deemed to satisfy. Northern Territory uses BCA or National Construction Code 2009 values, so they're usually fairly straightforward to pass as well. Yeah, and I mean, you can do it for any of the states, but there's just basically a good energy rater can look at the design and work out what will be the best way to get it to pass the energy efficiency requirements.
And right there is, I think, the most significant point is that you actually need to find somebody who's really experienced in doing this, experienced in doing it in different locations, and understands the various tools and the various legislation that applies so that they can work out what's going to be the simplest approach for your project. So that it's just not a one rule fits all thing, but that, the legislation is set up to give some opportunity to flex and change based on what you can argue and achieve in the intent of the legislation, isn't it? So working with somebody who's experienced in this regard. And what I find, homeowners don't even often get to meet their energy efficiency assessor because sometimes it's commissioned directly through the building certifier, when they go and get their building approval. So, I really encourage homeowners to get informed about this so that it can be part of their conversations early on. So now, I have homeowners who say to me, I want to exceed what's required. I want to get, 7, 8, 9, even 10 stars. Can you talk through how hard this can be in your standard residential approach? They'll say to me, well, I want to get 8 stars, but I don't want a green looking house, or, I don't want to go over the top, but I do want to future-proof this house. What are some of the things that you see work for people that isn't a massive big change in aesthetic or cost or design, but can make a difference and a big dent on the home's energy use overall?
Yeah, sure. Well, I love that kind of client, firstly. Isn't that great? What you can do is live in Rockhampton, because in Rockhampton it's really easy to get a high rating. That's random, but it is true. Whether you've got slab on ground or raised off ground, it's really easy to get a high rating. So why is that? Well, I mean, the climate is quite temperate up there. It is quite warm, but they've got the breezes from the ocean, but it doesn't get too cool in winter. So I think that's partly it. The other things you can do, if you want to increase your energy rating, you can certainly play around with the colours of your window frames, your walls and your roof, because those things are no cost. Obviously, if you're in a hotter climate zone, adding ceiling fans, that is incorporated into it's incorporated into the software energy rating, but it's good to remember that, of course, anything that increases your star rating is going to lead to a more thermally comfortable house and lower energy costs in the future. So it's not just kind of working out how to get up that rating. That rating actually has obviously real life benefits. So you can play around with those things, but if you really want a high energy rated house, it is possible. So the organisation that I'm accredited with, which is Building Designers Association of Victoria, they run a competition every year, which is a 10-star design house. And people have achieved a 10-star design, and some of them have actually been built. And this is in Victoria, which I think is fantastic because, Victoria's cold.
Yes.
But at some of these, you can Google them and have a look at them. Some of them are beautiful. They do have a look, but and if it's not your kind of style, then maybe you want to pull back from 10 because that's really, really high. But yeah, they're great homes. So 10 stars is possible. However, what you need to understand is that basically adding additional elements to increase the star rating comes with a diminishing rate of return. So what I mean by that is you put 1.5 insulation above your ceiling, it costs $1,000 or whatever, and say you get 4 stars energy rating.
As in your R rating 1.5?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So
yep.
that's the R rating is a measure of how slowly the heat will travel through that material. So R1.5 is 75 mils bulk insulation. If you went to R2.5, which is usually about 900 mil, it costs, say, an extra $500. And it might increase your star rating up to, we started with 4. So it would increase it up to, say, 5 with an extra $500. That's fantastic. If you wanted to then increase to 3.5, so R3.5, insulation above your ceiling, costs another $500, but it's actually only going to add maybe 0.1 or 2 of a star. So as you get beyond 6 stars, you can keep increasing, but you've got to spend more and more money per star. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it's an incremental diminishing, isn't it, in relation to the expense that you're actually having, So I think that's a great illustration, that insulation one. So you're saying 75 to 90 mil to then up to that. Yep. How thick is generally R3.5 insulation? Do you know off your head?
Oh, well, it depends if you're using high performance or not high performance. I actually don't know that. Probably about 120 mil.
Yeah. So obviously, you're paying extra money, but only incrementally increasing the star rating as a result. Whereas, and I imagine the same thing happens with your glazing choices. You go from, clear to tinted to low E glass to double glazing, those kinds of things, all quite significant cost increases with incremental impacts on the star ratings. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it is possible. And I guess that's where you just want to just have a really collaborative approach with your designer and your energy rater and try and understand it as much as you can as a homeowner and a designer, to understand, well, how far would you go and, what are you willing to do? And maybe, you really love dark window frames. You just love that look and you love that design. But if you can see, well, effectively trading that off is costing me this much in extra glazing, well, maybe I would. No, I really want them. I'm prepared to pay for that. So, yeah, I think having that kind of understanding and collaborative approach is great. Not always possible, though.
Yeah, I find that it's homeowners can get quite overwhelmed by all of the choices, but it's amazing when you get a price attached to something, how quickly it can help you assess your priorities and just how much value it is adding to you based on the price it's going to cost. And so, yeah, that recommendation of thinking about, okay, what are all these things that I could have? What are they all going to cost? What are the cost benefits going to be over the long-term running of the house? And is that worth it to me? And, it is that thing of starting with the design at its basis of designing for climate, designing for orientation, and then what are those switches in and out that you can make, as you said, the colour, the addition of ceiling fans. I mean, I think ceiling fans are fantastic to include in a home anyway, because they just, get air moving in the house very simply and can create comfort very, very quickly. And the ones now that you can get with the reverse direction, so they push the heat down as well, can improve the ability of the house to stay warm where you're actually living at ground level, in the house.
And I think understanding how fans contribute to the energy efficiency or to lowering your costs, it seems really basic, but actually what it means is that on those days where, say, 24 degrees, we don't need fans, beautiful day, bit of a breeze, 25, 26, 27 inside your house, if you've got fans, you'll turn them on. You won't even think you need air conditioning because that'll be just cool and comfortable. You'll be happy. And when you realise that your particular climate zone, the temperature inside your house might be at that 25, 26, 27 for weeks at a time, that's where you can see, ceiling fans save me money because I don't even want to turn on my air conditioning for weeks at a time. That's where you can understand, the benefit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tip. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, Tori, what big mistakes do you see people make when they're approaching the energy efficiency of their home and thinking about energy efficiency overall?
Yeah, firstly, I get it. I get any mistake because I didn't even know about this industry before I got involved. So I think if people feel like, I've got so much to think about with my house, this is another whole area and I don't know anything, that's okay because most people don't know anything. Although, as you said, I think people are starting to appreciate, especially with the energy costs rising, I think they're starting to appreciate at least the concept of the value of an energy efficient home. In terms of mistakes, we've spoken about it. One of them is just thinking it doesn't really matter. I'm just all about design and I get it because I love good design. But yeah, when you can see if I put a little bit more money in now or if I take a little bit more time to get this right now, that's going to lead to savings over the life of the house really. I think that helps people understand that it does matter. And I think once it does cross your radar, I guess it'd be a mistake to think, I don't really care, just get a pass however you can. Yeah, so that's probably the first mistake. I think the second mistake is thinking it's this concept that's out there and not realising, yes, there's a financial benefit, but you alluded to it before, it's the thermal comfort. So I think when you're thinking of design, often you're thinking, well, what do I want it to be like? What do I want it to feel like? And if you have an energy efficient home, normally you've got a home then that you can walk into on a hot summer's day with your tired kids or all your shopping, and it's just cool. And that is really, really good. Or to have one of those homes that, on a cold winter's day, you've got that nice sunny nook or you've got that kind of warmth coming in. I mean, that's gold, and that's what the energy efficient home will give you if you design it and construct it well. So I think realising that those two things go together. And then the other thing I think is glazing. And glazing is complicated, but I think a mistake would be to just sort of think glazing is just one more thing, one more component. But actually, it really is a big part of your wall. And I explain it to people, you're talking about putting bulk insulation in your wall. Your window does not have any bulk insulation in it. So that is, it's often equivalent to a whole wall of your house that has nothing. And even sort of really increasing to low E or double glazed, it still only increases the R value sort of 0.1, 0.2. So sort of appreciating, I guess, the appreciating the impact that your glazing will have, both positively and negatively, because obviously you can draw in light, you can see views, and also you can draw in winter heat with the sun. Appreciating that is going to be a big thing to think about with your home.
Yeah, and even at the simplest level, make sure that you still got money in your budget for window furnishings, and those types of things at the end of the day. Because, it's everybody.
Although, can I just jump in and say window furnishing, this is something, I've learned so much in this industry, but the fascinating thing about window furnishings is that you get the I'm making up this percentage, but 90% of your value in window furnishings, in keeping heat out and keeping warmth in, is actually in the air gap. So heat doesn't travel. Yeah.
Wow.
So you can have like a really thick drape, or you can have those special reflective kind of Holland blinds, but really just a piece of cotton or a piece of anything, it will trap, the heat will come in through the window, and it just travels really slowly through air. If you think about a kettle boiling, you touch it, well, old style kettle, a metal kettle, you touch it, it's hot. But if you hold your hand just like half a centimetre off, you're not getting burned. And that's because air is a really poor insulator, a really good insulator, as in the heat doesn't travel through air.
Yes.
So if you're thinking window furnishings, really doesn't matter what they are. Go for whatever you like, because they're going to, as long as you've got them, they're going to do a really good job.
That's a great tip. So Tori, you've just given us some fantastic information in this interview. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to pop resources in the show notes. Tori's got a fantastic blog on her website that just answers some of those really key questions that I know I hear from a lot of homeowners about, does this really matter? What if I do this? Will this make a difference? Those kinds of questions, Tori's answered them on her blog. So it's a great resource. And if you want to chat further to Tori, you can find her details there too. So thank you so much for your time, Tori. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Cheers.